Kobe Bryant accidentally meets an old friend who once dreamed of becoming a basketball star but now works as a mechanic. Their meeting awakens the past, and Kobe does something unexpected. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories, and write in the comments what city you're from. Kobe Bryant had always found it strange how returning to Philadelphia brought back an odd mix of emotions. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was something deeper, something rooted in the streets and cracked pavements of his childhood. No matter how many years had passed, the city still smelled the same. Hot asphalt in the summer, damp bricks after the rain, the faint scent of cheesesteaks wafting from food carts at every other corner. This was home, and yet it wasn't. Not anymore. His flight had landed early that morning. He had a few meetings scheduled with city officials to discuss funding for youth basketball programs, something that had become his passion after retiring from the NBA. But the rest of the day was his. He could have gone straight to his hotel to relax, but something about being in his old neighborhood made him restless. He wanted to drive around, see the courts where he had once played, the parks where he had spent hours honing his game. As he navigated through the streets in his rental car, a familiar unease settled over him. The city had changed. Some areas looked better, others worse. The places where he had once dribbled a ball until his hands were raw were now paved over, turned into parking lots or convenience store lots. He turned a corner, and that's when he saw it. A small, somewhat run-down auto repair shop, squeezed between two larger businesses. The sign above the entrance was faded, but still legible. Carter's Auto and Repair. Kobe didn't think much of it at first. His car had been making a slight noise, nothing serious, but enough for him to consider pulling over. He checked the time. There was no rush. He turned into the lot and parked. The moment he stepped out, the sounds of the city faded slightly. The distant hum of traffic, the occasional honk, the chatter of people on the sidewalks, it all seemed to dull as he took in the shop before him. The garage door was rolled up, revealing the dimly lit interior of the workshop. A few cars were parked inside, their hoods open, and the scent of oil and metal filled the air. A man emerged from behind one of the cars, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but with a slight hunch to his posture, as if years of physical labor had weighed him down. His face was partially shadowed by the dim lighting, but when he stepped forward, into the sunlight streaming through the garage door, Kobe felt his breath catch. Jason Carter. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jason froze in place, his eyes locking onto Kobe's with a look of disbelief. It was the kind of moment that stretched on longer than it should have, where neither person knew what to say or how to react. Then Jason blinked, shook his head slightly, and forced a tight smile. "Can I help you?" His voice was the same, deep and steady, but there was something else there, something almost guarded. Kobe took a second to respond. He had prepared himself for a normal afternoon, for nothing out of the ordinary. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to see him. "It's been a long time," Kobe finally said. Jason's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah," he said, nodding slowly. "It has." Kobe felt an awkwardness settle between them. He hadn't felt awkward in years, not since he was a kid, nervous before a game, before he had learned how to command a room with his presence. But now, standing in front of Jason, he felt like he had been transported back to his teenage years. Jason had been his closest friend, his first real basketball mentor. The kid who had taught him how to dribble with both hands, how to fake left and drive right, how to stay quick on his feet. They had spent entire summers on the courts, sweating under the unforgiving sun, pushing each other to get better. And then, one day, Jason had just disappeared. Kobe had tried to find out what happened to him back then. He had asked around, but no one seemed to know much. Some said Jason had gotten injured, others mentioned family troubles. Over the years, life moved on, and Kobe had become, well, Kobe Bryant. But he had never forgotten Jason. Not really. Now, standing in front of him, he saw none of the fierce, confident kid he had once known. Jason's face was leaner, harder, lined with exhaustion. His work uniform was stained with grease, his boots scuffed and worn, and there was something in his eyes, something that made Kobe uneasy. "So," Jason said, shifting slightly, as if waiting for Kobe to say something else. Kobe hesitated before nodding toward his car. "Yeah, I just needed a quick checkup. Thought I heard something off with the engine." Jason studied him for a second before nodding. "I can take a look. Give me a minute." He turned and walked back toward the garage without another word. Kobe exhaled and followed. Inside, the garage was cluttered but organized. Tools lined the walls, oil-streaked rags draped over workbenches. The smell of gasoline lingered in the air. Jason worked in silence, popping the hood of Kobe's car, checking the engine with practiced efficiency. Kobe leaned against the workbench, watching him. He wanted to say something, to ask about the past, but Jason's demeanor made it clear he wasn't in the mood for reminiscing. Minutes passed in near silence, the only sounds coming from Jason's movements and the occasional clang of metal against metal. Finally, Jason straightened, wiping his hands again. "Nothing major," he said. "Just some minor wear and tear. I can tighten a few things up, but you're good." Kobe nodded, but he wasn't really thinking about the car anymore. He was thinking about him, about how different he looked, how tired. "Thanks," Kobe said. Jason nodded, stepping back. "No problem." There was a pause, the kind that stretched too long. Kobe wanted to ask so many things. What had happened to him after high school, why he had disappeared, if he still played basketball at all. But he knew better than to push. Jason checked his watch. "I should get back to work," he said, his tone final. Kobe hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, right. Well, good seeing you, man." Jason gave him another one of those tight, unreadable smiles. "Yeah, you too." Kobe turned, walked back to his car, slid into the driver's seat. But as he pulled away from the shop, he caught one last glimpse of Jason through the rearview mirror. He was standing in the doorway of the garage watching Kobe leave, his expression unreadable. Kobe gripped the steering wheel tighter. This didn't sit right with him. He needed to know more. Kobe drove through the streets of Philadelphia, but his mind wasn't on the road. The conversation, or lack of one, with Jason Carter kept replaying in his head. There had been something about Jason's expression, the way he barely met Kobe's gaze, that unsettled him. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion he had seen in his old friend's face. It was something deeper, something heavier. Jason had always been a fighter, the kind of kid who took every challenge head on. And yet, the man he had just seen at the auto shop looked like he had been carrying the weight of the world for too long. He reached his hotel, parked in the underground lot, and took the elevator up to his suite. The city skyline stretched out before him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but he barely noticed. He sat down on the couch, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His phone was still in his pocket, and he pulled it out, scrolling through his contacts. There had to be someone who knew what had happened to Jason over the years. He started with an old coach, one of the few people from his teenage years he still kept in touch with. The man picked up on the second ring, surprised to hear from him, but pleased all the same. They exchanged pleasantries, but Kobe quickly shifted the conversation. He asked if the coach remembered Jason Carter. "Of course," the man said. "Jason was one of the best players I ever saw at that age. He had something special. You two were always pushing each other." Kobe nodded, though the coach couldn't see him. "Yeah, he was the best back then. But what happened to him?" There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "He got hurt," the coach said. "Senior year. I don't know if you ever heard, but it was bad. Knee injury, completely wrecked his chances at a college scholarship. I remember seeing him after that, and, well, he just wasn't the same." Kobe felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't known. By the time he had left Philadelphia for his own basketball journey, Jason had already started fading from the conversations around the game. "What did he do after that?" Kobe asked. "Worked, mostly. He was always a hard worker. Got a job right out of high school. I think his family was struggling. His mom, good woman, she had some health issues and Jason stepped up. That's just the kind of kid he was. Never complained, just handled his business." Kobe stared at the floor, processing that. Jason had sacrificed everything, just like that. And no one had ever talked about it. No one had ever said, "Hey, remember that kid who could have been great? Yeah, life threw him a bad hand, and now he's just trying to survive." "Do you know where he is now?" Kobe asked, though he already knew the answer. The coach hesitated. "Last I heard, he was working at a garage. Same one his uncle used to own. I guess he took over after his uncle passed. It's tough, though. Small business, long hours, hard life." Kobe thanked him for the information and ended the call. He sat there for a long moment, staring at his phone. Jason hadn't just drifted away. He had been forced down a different path, one where basketball wasn't an option. And instead of fighting it, he had done what he had always done. He took care of his responsibilities. That should have made Kobe feel better, knowing that Jason hadn't fallen into something worse. But somehow it made him feel worse, because he could still hear Jason's voice from all those years ago, on those late nights after they had played for hours on the neighborhood courts. "We're going to make it, man. Me and you, big leagues." They had been kids, full of dreams, and for one of them, those dreams had come true. The other had been left behind. The next morning, Kobe decided to do more than just think about it. He drove back into his old neighborhood, taking his time, driving past places he hadn't seen in years. The houses looked smaller than he remembered, the streets narrower. Time had a funny way of changing perspective. He parked near a corner store and got out. A few older guys sat on crates outside, drinking coffee, watching the street like they had nothing better to do. One of them recognized him immediately, nudging the others. "Well, damn, look who it is." Kobe shook hands, exchanged smiles. These were the men who had been around when he was a kid, the ones who had watched him play, who had told him to keep working hard. They asked how long he was in town, if he was back for good, if he missed Philly. He gave them easy answers, letting them believe whatever they wanted. Eventually, he brought up Jason. The smiles faded. "You saw Jay?" one of them asked, rubbing a hand over his beard. "Man, that dude's been grinding forever." Kobe nodded. "I stopped by his shop yesterday. He didn't say much." "He wouldn't," another man said. "Jay don't like to talk about himself. You know how he is." "What happened to him?" Kobe asked. "I mean, after the injury." They told him the same thing the coach had. Jason had been forced to grow up fast, working long hours to help his family. His mother had been sick for years, and Jason had taken care of everything. He had never married, never left Philly, just worked. "He ever play ball anymore?" Kobe asked. One of the men shook his head. "Not that I've seen. Think he put all that behind him." Kobe couldn't imagine it. Jason had loved basketball more than anyone he knew, and now he had just let it go. That night, back at his hotel, Kobe couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Jason, about all the talent that had gone to waste, all the years he had spent in that garage, hands covered in grease instead of gripping a basketball. Some people might have looked at Jason and thought, well, life's just like that. But Kobe couldn't accept that. Jason had given him something all those years ago, belief. He had believed in Kobe when they were kids, had pushed him to be better, had taught him how to fight for every inch on the court. Maybe it was time for Kobe to return the favor. The next morning, he got up early. He had a plan forming in his mind, something that was just starting to take shape. But first he had to go see Jason again, and this time he wasn't just going to let him brush him off. Kobe woke up before the sun had fully risen, his mind still lingering on the thoughts of the past few days. The city outside was just beginning to stir, but he had barely slept. The more he thought about Jason, the more the injustice of it gnawed at him. It wasn't just that his old friend had been dealt a bad hand. It was that he had accepted it, let it define him, and never looked back. Kobe couldn't accept that. He had spent his entire life refusing to settle, fighting for something greater. He couldn't let Jason fade into the background of his own life, not when he had once been the one pushing Kobe to be better. He got dressed quickly, pulling on a simple hoodie and jeans, wanting to blend in. He didn't want this to be about who he was now. He wanted to talk to Jason as the kid he had once been, not as the global icon he had become. By the time he reached the auto shop, the garage door was already open, and Jason was moving between cars, a rag tucked into the pocket of his overalls. The smell of oil and metal was thick in the air, and the sound of an air compressor filled the space. Jason glanced up as Kobe walked in, his expression unreadable. "You back again?" he said, wiping his hands. Kobe nodded. "Yeah, needed to talk." Jason gestured toward a chair near the workbench, but Kobe didn't sit. He wasn't here for small talk. "I've been asking around about you," Kobe said, "talking to some of the guys from the neighborhood, talking to Coach." Jason's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. He sighed, setting the rag down. "Why?" "Because I want to know why you just gave up," Kobe said. Jason stiffened slightly, his jaw tightening. He exhaled sharply through his nose and crossed his arms over his chest. "I didn't give up," he said. "Life just worked out the way it did." Kobe shook his head. "No, that's not the Jason Carter I knew. The guy I grew up with, the guy who taught me how to move on the court, never accepted anything less than the best. And now you're telling me that this," he gestured around the shop, "is the way things were supposed to turn out for you?" Jason looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "Things change, man. Not everybody gets to make it. That's bullshit." Jason shot him a look, surprised at the sudden intensity in Kobe's voice. "You didn't just not make it. You stopped trying. You let one bad break decide the rest of your life," Kobe said. Jason laughed, but it wasn't out of amusement. It was bitter, tired. "Not all of us get second chances, Kobe. Some of us have responsibilities. Some of us don't have the luxury of chasing dreams after life kicks us in the teeth." Kobe let the words hang in the air for a moment. He had expected resistance. He had expected Jason to push back. But he wasn't leaving without saying what needed to be said. "You ever miss it?" Kobe asked. Jason hesitated just for a second, but that second told Kobe everything. "I don't have time to miss it," Jason finally said, but the words rang hollow. Kobe watched him carefully. "I've got an offer for you," he said. Jason frowned. "If this is about money—" "It's not," Jason exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Then what?" Kobe stepped forward, his voice quieter now but firm. "I run a basketball center in L.A. for kids who need guidance, kids who need someone to believe in them. It's not just about teaching them how to play, it's about giving them something to hold on to, something that keeps them off the streets and out of trouble. I want you to come with me. Be a part of it." Jason blinked as if he hadn't expected that. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're crazy." Kobe shrugged. "Maybe, but I know talent when I see it. And you've always had it, not just as a player, but as a mentor. You taught me. You taught half the kids in the neighborhood back then. You were a leader. You still can be." Jason shook his head, turning away. "That was a long time ago." "So what?" Kobe said. "You think that just disappears? You think all those years of knowing the game, knowing how to help kids like us, just vanish?" Jason didn't answer. Kobe let out a slow breath. "I'm not saying you have to make a decision right now," he said. "I'm saying, come see it. Come to L.A. for a few days. Watch what we do. If it's not for you, fine, no pressure. But don't tell me no without even giving it a shot." Jason was silent for a long moment. Then he let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "You really don't give up, do you?" Kobe smiled. "Never have." Jason rubbed his face, looking down at his hands, calloused and stained from years of work. He sighed. "All right," he said finally. "I'll think about it." Kobe nodded. That was all he needed for now. He had planted the seed. Now he just had to wait and see if Jason would let it grow. Kobe spent the rest of the day thinking about his conversation with Jason. He had made his offer, but he knew Jason well enough to understand that thinking about something didn't necessarily mean acting on it. Jason had always been stubborn, always reluctant to take help from anyone. It wasn't about pride, it was about responsibility. He had spent years believing that his life had to be a certain way, that he had to be the one taking care of things, handling problems on his own. It was a mindset that had kept him grounded, but had also kept him stuck. Kobe didn't want to push too hard, but he also wasn't going to let Jason just brush this off. He had seen the flicker in his old friend's eyes, the hesitation in his voice. Jason missed the game. He missed what it had meant to him. And more than that, he missed who he had been when he was on the court. The next morning, Kobe woke early, ran through his usual routine, and by noon, he was back at the garage. He didn't call ahead. He didn't want to give Jason the chance to make an excuse. When he pulled into the lot, he saw Jason hunched over the open hood of a car, his sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his forehead. The air smelled like oil and grease, thick with the heat of the afternoon. Jason looked up, spotted Kobe, and shook his head with a smirk. "You again?" he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Kobe leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "Told you I wasn't going to let this go." Jason let out a breath, tossing the rag onto a workbench. "Yeah, I figured." Kobe stepped inside, taking in the details of the shop. It was small, but well kept. The tools were neatly organized, the floors relatively clean despite the nature of the work. There were signs that Jason took pride in what he did, that he had built something steady for himself, but there was also an emptiness to it, a routine, a cycle that never changed. Jason grabbed a bottle of water from a cooler in the corner, taking a long drink before looking at Kobe again. "So what, you just gonna show up here every day until I say yes?" Kobe shrugged. "Something like that." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, you really don't know how to let things go, do you?" "Not when I know I'm right." Jason sighed, running a hand over his face. He looked tired, not just from work, but from everything. Kobe decided to shift the conversation. He gestured towards the lot outside. "Got any time for a break?" Jason frowned slightly. "Why?" Kobe smiled. "Thought we could go check out something." Jason studied him for a long moment, then let out a resigned breath. "All right. But if this is some kind of setup, I'm making you change your own oil before you leave." They drove through the old neighborhood, past the courts where they used to play. Some of them had been resurfaced, others left to crack and fade. It was strange, seeing it all again, remembering the nights they had spent here, the games that had felt like the most important things in the world at the time. Kobe pulled into a small community park where a half-court stood in the middle of an open field. A group of kids were playing, their laughter and shouts echoing in the warm air. Jason glanced at him, suspicion in his eyes. "You bring me here for a reason?" Kobe nodded toward the court. "Figured you could watch a little, maybe give them some pointers." Jason scoffed. "Come on, man. Just watch." They stood near the edge of the court, arms crossed as the kids continued their game. They were young, maybe 13 or 14, full of energy but lacking in control. One boy tried a fancy spin move and lost the ball. Another took a shot that clanked hard against the backboard. They were raw, but the passion was there. Jason watched in silence. One of the kids, tall, lanky, clearly the best of the group, called for the ball and drove toward the basket. He went up for a layup but got caught in midair, awkwardly adjusting his shot at the last second. It hit the rim and bounced out. Jason shook his head. "Kid's got good instincts," he muttered, "but he's going too fast, rushing the shot." Kobe glanced at him. "Maybe you should tell him that." Jason hesitated, then sighed. "Nah, they're just having fun." One of the kids missed another shot, groaning in frustration. He turned and saw Kobe standing there, his eyes going wide. He nudged his friend, who turned, and within seconds the entire game had stopped. "Yo," one of them said, pointing, "that's Kobe Bryant." Kobe smiled. "What's up, fellas?" They all rushed over, talking at once, asking for pictures, for advice, for anything. Jason took a step back, suddenly looking uncomfortable. One of the kids, the lanky one, held up the ball. "You want to play with us?" Kobe shook his head. "Not today. But my guy here, he might be able to help you out." Jason shot him a look. "What?" Kobe patted his shoulder. "Come on, man, just one drill, show them something." The kids all turned to Jason, waiting, expecting. Jason exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Y'all got no idea who I am." One of them grinned. "Nah, but if you roll with Kobe, you gotta be good." Jason looked at them, then at Kobe. For a second, it seemed like he was going to refuse. But then he took the ball, bounced it once, twice, felt it in his hands. And just like that, something shifted. He started showing them a few things: basic footwork, positioning, how to stay balanced on a drive. He wasn't flashy about it, wasn't trying to impress them. He was just teaching, explaining, correcting their movements with small adjustments. Kobe watched from the side, arms crossed, hiding his smile. This was what Jason was meant to do. He could see it, clear as day. After about 20 minutes, Jason handed the ball back to one of the kids, stepping back. "All right, that's enough. Y'all figure the rest out." The kids thanked him, went back to their game, and Jason walked over to Kobe, shaking his head. "You set me up," he muttered. Kobe grinned. "You didn't have to do it." Jason rubbed his face, exhaling. "Man, that felt weird." "What?" Jason hesitated, then admitted. "Felt good." Kobe nodded. "Yeah, I bet it did." Jason looked back at the court, watching the kids play. He didn't say anything, but Kobe could see the gears turning in his head. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see what Kobe had seen all along. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. The drive back from the park was quiet. Both he and Kobe lost in their own thoughts. He felt restless, like an itch he couldn't scratch. Coaching those kids, even for just a few minutes, had awakened something buried so deep he had almost forgotten it was there. He had spent years convincing himself that basketball was just a chapter of his life that had ended. But standing on that court, watching those kids struggle and learn, had reminded him of something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Purpose. Kobe didn't push him, didn't try to force him into a conversation about it. He just drove, letting Jason sit with whatever was happening in his head. It was frustrating, in a way, how easily Kobe saw through him, how he knew exactly which buttons to press without pressing them too hard. Jason had always admired that about him, even as kids. He had always been relentless, always able to see the bigger picture. And right now, Jason had the sinking feeling that Kobe had seen something in him before he had even seen it himself. When they pulled up to the garage, Jason exhaled and ran a hand through his short hair. He needed to get back to work. He needed something to do with his hands, something to ground him before his thoughts ran too far in a direction he wasn't sure he wanted them to go. Kobe put the car in park, but didn't move to get out. He rested his hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. "You felt it, didn't you?" Jason glanced at him, then looked away. "Felt what?" Kobe smirked, shaking his head. "You know what?" Jason sighed. He grabbed the door handle, ready to get out, but Kobe's voice stopped him. "You can lie to yourself all you want, Jay, but I know that feeling. You can't just turn it off." Jason let out a short laugh, one without humor. "You act like playing with some kids for 20 minutes means something." "It does." Jason turned to face him fully. "Yeah? And what do you think it means?" Kobe held his gaze. "That you still love it, that you still have something to give." Jason looked away, shaking his head. "I got a job, man. I got bills, responsibilities. I don't have time to chase something that's not real." Kobe leaned back, watching him. "You think what you're doing now is more real than that, than being on that court, helping those kids?" Jason didn't answer. Kobe let the silence stretch before finally speaking again. "Look, I'm not telling you to drop everything and come to LA tomorrow. I'm just asking you to come check it out. Just for a few days. See what we do. If you hate it, you walk away. No pressure." Jason hesitated. He wanted to say no. He wanted to shut this down before it got too deep, before it messed with the life he had settled into. But something about the way Kobe was looking at him, steady, expectant, like he already knew the answer, made it impossible to dismiss outright. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling. "I'll think about it." Kobe nodded like he had already won. "That's all I'm asking." Jason shook his head, chuckling under his breath. "You don't stop, do you?" "Never have," Kobe said, smirking. Jason stepped out of the car and headed back toward the garage, but as he reached the door, he glanced back. Kobe was still sitting there, watching him. Not pushing, just waiting. And damn it, Jason knew he was right. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day. It wasn't just that he had enjoyed coaching those kids. It was that he had forgotten, even for a moment, about everything else, about the garage, the endless cycle of work, the weight he had carried for so long. For those 20 minutes, he had felt like himself again. Like the kid who used to dream. But dreams didn't pay bills. He got up, pacing the small space of his bedroom. His mother was asleep in the next room and the house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. He thought about the garage, about the years he had poured into keeping it afloat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his. It was stable. It was safe. But was it enough? He grabbed his phone off the dresser, his thumb hovering over Kobe's number. He hesitated. Then, before he could think too much about it, he typed out a message. "When are you leaving?" The reply came almost immediately. "Tomorrow afternoon." Jason stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "Fine, I'll come. Just a couple days." The response was just one word, "Good." Jason sighed and tossed the phone onto the bed. He ran a hand over his face, already second-guessing himself. But deep down, he knew. This wasn't just a trip. This was something bigger. Something he wasn't sure he was ready for. But it was happening. Whether he liked it or not. Jason had never liked airports, the crowds, the noise, the constant movement. It was too chaotic, too unpredictable. He had spent most of his life in places where things made sense, where there was order, even in hard work. A car engine was simple. It had problems, sure, but there was always a way to fix them. You could take it apart, see where things had gone wrong, and put it back together. Life didn't work like that. As he followed Kobe through the terminal, carrying nothing but a small duffel bag with a couple of changes of clothes, he already felt out of place. He hadn't been on a plane in years. The last time had been for a cousin's wedding, and even then he had only gone because his mother had insisted. Now he was flying across the country for something that didn't even make sense to him yet. Kobe moved with ease, nodding occasionally at people who recognized him but never stopping. He had done this 1,000 times before. To him, an airport was just another stop between where he had been and where he was going. Jason envied that certainty. They boarded the flight without much conversation. Jason had too much in his head to say anything, and Kobe, maybe sensing that, let him be. The first few hours passed in silence. Jason stared out the window, watching the land shift below them, feeling the distance between himself and home grow wider with every mile. Kobe finally spoke when they were somewhere over the Midwest. "You nervous?" Jason exhaled. "I don't know what I am." Kobe nodded like he understood. "It's just a visit, man. No pressure." Jason looked at him. "That's easy for you to say." Kobe smirked. "Yeah, it is." Jason let the conversation end there. He wasn't ready to talk about what was really bothering him, the fact that a part of him wanted to want this. That was the problem. If he had hated the idea completely, it would have been easy to say no, but something about it had gotten under his skin, and that scared him more than anything. By the time they landed in Los Angeles, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city. Jason had seen it in movies, on TV, but being here felt different. It was bigger than he had imagined, louder, more alive. Everything moved fast, like the whole city was in a constant hurry. Kobe's car was waiting for them, sleek and black, parked near the curb with a driver standing by. Jason hesitated before getting in, feeling the weight of what this meant. Once he stepped into that car, there was no turning back. The drive to Kobe's house was quiet. Jason stared out the window, taking in the unfamiliar skyline, the palm trees swaying in the breeze. It felt like another world. Kobe's house wasn't a mansion in the traditional sense, but it was big, sprawling, modern, the kind of place Jason had never even imagined himself setting foot in. The moment they walked inside, he felt like an outsider. Kobe led him through the house, past walls lined with trophies, jerseys, photographs of moments in basketball history. Jason barely glanced at them. He wasn't here for that. Kobe showed him to a guest room. Simple, clean, bigger than Jason's entire apartment back home. He dropped his bag near the door and sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. Kobe leaned against the door frame. "You good?" Jason nodded. "Yeah, just a lot." Kobe smiled slightly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll take you to the center." Jason lay awake for a long time after Kobe left, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar quiet of the house. He felt out of place, like he had walked into a life that didn't belong to him. The next morning, Kobe was already waiting for him downstairs, dressed in workout gear, drinking a smoothie. "You eat breakfast?" he asked as Jason walked in. Jason shook his head. Kobe tossed him a protein bar. "Eat that. You're gonna need it." Jason didn't ask why. He just followed Kobe outside, where the car was already waiting. The drive to the youth center took about 30 minutes. When they pulled up, Jason felt something tighten in his chest. The building was huge, modern, surrounded by courts and fields. It looked nothing like the places they had played growing up. Inside, the energy was immediate. Kids ran through the halls, some heading to practice, others to classrooms. Coaches moved through the space, directing traffic, checking schedules. There was movement everywhere, a sense of purpose. Kobe led him through, pointing things out. The gym, the training rooms, the classrooms where kids got tutoring before and after practice. Jason tried to take it all in, but it was overwhelming. Finally, Kobe stopped near the main court where a group of kids were running drills. "Watch for a bit," Kobe said. Jason did. He saw the way the kids moved, the way the coaches interacted with them, the way some of them already carried themselves like athletes. He recognized that look, the hunger, the need to prove something. One of the kids caught his eye. Tall, lean, quick on his feet. He reminded Jason of himself at that age. The way he handled the ball, the way he studied the court, calculating every move. Jason didn't realize he had stepped forward until Kobe spoke. "You see something?" Jason nodded slowly. "That kid, number 22. Kobe followed his gaze. "Yeah, he's good. Needs polish, though. Footwork's messy." Jason crossed his arms. "He's rushing his movement, trying to go too fast." Kobe watched him carefully. "You should tell him that." Jason hesitated. Kobe smiled. "Just one drill." Jason looked at the court again, at the kid, at the game. He let out a breath. "All right." He stepped onto the court before he could change his mind. The kids slowed as he approached, glancing at Kobe, waiting for instructions. Jason gestured toward the kid. "You're moving too fast on your cuts." The kid blinked, surprised. "Huh?" Jason grabbed a ball, dribbled once. "You're thinking 2 steps ahead, but your feet aren't ready. You gotta slow down, control your movement." The kid hesitated, then nodded. Jason set up a quick drill, showing him how to plant his feet, how to balance his weight better. The kid followed his instructions, adjusting. After a few tries, he got it right. He grinned, the excitement clear on his face. Jason stepped back, watching. He had missed this, more than he had ever admitted. Kobe clapped a hand on his shoulder. "See? Natural." Jason exhaled, shaking his head. "Don't start." Kobe just smiled. Jason walked off the court, but as he did, he felt something different. The doubt was still there, but so was something else. something he hadn't felt in years, and it scared the hell out of him. Jason didn't know how to explain what he was feeling as he stepped off the court. He told himself he was just caught up in the moment, that it didn't mean anything. But the truth was, it did. It meant more than he was ready to admit. For the rest of the day, he followed Kobe through the youth center, watching everything, taking it all in. He listened as Kobe explained how the center worked, how they trained the kids not just in basketball, but in life skills, education, discipline. It was more than a gym. It was a second home for a lot of these kids. Jason saw it in their eyes, the way they clung to every word the coaches said, the way they pushed themselves on the court, hoping that someone would notice, that someone would believe in them. He knew that feeling. He had lived that feeling, and yet he had spent years pretending it didn't matter anymore. Kobe didn't pressure him. He didn't say anything about the way Jason had stepped in during practice, the way he had corrected that kid's footwork like it was second nature. He didn't have to. Jason could feel the question hanging between them. That night, back at Kobe's house, Jason sat outside on the back patio, staring at the dark horizon. The city stretched out in front of him, endless, glowing, full of possibility. He had never seen anything like it. Kobe stepped outside, 2 beers in hand. He handed one to Jason and sat beside him. They sat in silence for a while, drinking, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Jason finally spoke. "You ever wonder what would have happened if things went different?" Kobe took a sip of his beer, considering. "Yeah, sometimes." Jason nodded. "I do too." He didn't need to say what he meant. Kobe understood. For a long time, Jason had told himself that he was at peace with how things had turned out, that there was no point in looking back and wondering about what-ifs. But being here, seeing this place, seeing the kids who reminded him of himself, it made him realize how much he had buried. Kobe leaned back, stretching his legs out. "You know, I don't think it's ever too late to start something new." Jason let out a short laugh. "That's easy for you to say." Kobe smirked. "Yeah, maybe, but you gotta admit you didn't hate today." Jason stared at his beer bottle, running his thumb over the label. "No," he admitted. "I didn't." Kobe didn't push any further. He just let the words settle. The next day, Jason returned to the youth center with Kobe. This time, he wasn't just observing. He spent more time on the court, talking to the kids, giving small pointers here and there. He caught himself slipping into old habits, explaining movements, breaking down techniques, and he liked it. One of the younger coaches approached him during a break. "You ever coached before?" Jason shook his head. "Not officially." The guy nodded. "You got a good way of explaining things. Some guys can play, but they can't teach. You can." Jason didn't know how to respond to that. By the end of the week, he felt something shifting inside him. The doubt was still there, but it wasn't as heavy as before. He was starting to believe, just a little, that maybe he still had something to give. Kobe picked up on it. "You ready to stop pretending you don't want this?" he asked one afternoon as they sat in the stands watching the kids scrimmage. Jason sighed. "I don't know, man." Kobe chuckled. "Yeah, you do." Jason exhaled, rubbing his hands together. "What if I can't do it?" Kobe's expression softened. "You already are." Jason sat with that for a long moment. Maybe Kobe was right. Maybe it was time to stop running from the past and start looking towards something new. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready for it. Jason woke before dawn, the soft glow of the city still flickering outside the window of the guest room. He lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of Los Angeles waking up. He had never known a silence like this. Not the kind that came with being alone, but the kind that came when something inside you was shifting, when a decision had already been made, even if you hadn't admitted it yet. He sat up, rubbing his hands over his face. His body was sore in ways it hadn't been in years. 2 weeks of working with the kids at the center had reminded him of muscles he had forgotten about, of movements that had once come naturally. But more than that, it had reminded him of something deeper. He wasn't just playing again, he was teaching. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was actually doing something that mattered. By the time he made it downstairs, Kobe was already awake, drinking coffee in the kitchen. He didn't look surprised to see Jason up early. "You're thinking about it," Kobe said, setting his mug down. Jason leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Yeah." Kobe studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good." Jason exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't know how to make this work, man. I got a life back home. I got responsibilities." Kobe took a sip of his coffee. "And?" Jason frowned. "What do you mean, and?" Kobe set his mug down again, leaning forward. "And what's stopping you? What's really stopping you?" Jason opened his mouth, ready to answer, but nothing came. Because he didn't know. For years, he had told himself that the reason he stayed in Philadelphia, the reason he had never done more, was because he had to. Because he didn't have a choice. But the truth was, the only thing that had kept him there was himself. He had been afraid. Afraid of trying again. Afraid of failing. Kobe nodded like he saw the realization settle. "You got time to figure it out, but don't lie to yourself. You want this." Jason sighed. "Yeah," he admitted. "I do." It was the first time he had said it out loud. That afternoon, they returned to the youth center. Jason watched as the kids played, as the coaches worked with them, as the entire system ran like a machine built to give back. He saw himself in those kids, not just in the way they played, but in the way they needed something, someone. He had needed that once, too. Kobe walked up beside him, watching the game in front of them. "You ready?" he asked. Jason nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." Kobe smiled. "Then let's make it happen." Jason took a deep breath, watching as the game unfolded before him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just looking at the past. He was looking at the future. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Share this video with others who might find it inspiring. And if you want more stories like this, check out the next video on your screen. Thanks for watching.